This is the Stuff Report, a weekly look at hoarding in the headlines. Here's what's happening.
This week, Psychology Today published a piece that feels like a direct follow-up to something we talked about in our very first episode. In TSR 001, we covered a landmark twin study that found hoarding is about 50% heritable. That raised a question for a lot of listeners. If it is genetic, where is the gene?
And the answer turns out to be a lot more interesting than chromosome 14.
The new article is by Dr. Shirley Mueller, the same author who wrote the twin study piece we covered. She traces the full arc of hoarding genetics research, starting with something called the 2009 OCD Collaborative Genetics Study. That study found what looked like a strong signal on chromosome 14 in families where multiple members hoarded.
And for a while, that got treated as the answer. You would hear people say, hoarding has been linked to chromosome 14. It sounded clean, scientific, like we found the switch.
But here is what happened next. As more studies came in, including family studies, twin studies, and eventually genome-wide association studies, that clean picture fell apart. The largest meta-analysis to date looked at hoarding symptoms in more than 27,000 people. No single genetic variant achieved statistical significance.
That is a big deal. By that point, people had spent years looking for one gene, one location, one chromosome that could explain hoarding. What the data actually shows is something much more distributed, what scientists call polygenic.
Essentially, there is no hoarding gene. There are hundreds or thousands of small genetic signals spread across the entire genome that each contribute a tiny amount of risk. They interact with each other, and they interact with life experience, trauma, loss, stress. That combination is what determines whether the tendency actually shows up.
And the article makes an important point about what this means for how we talk about hoarding. It is not more complicated to say polygenic architecture instead of chromosome 14. It is just more honest. And the honesty matters because a single gene story implies a single solution. A distributed story implies there are many pathways in and many pathways out, which is what people see on the ground.
Dr. Mueller also notes that the chromosome 14 linkage is not wrong exactly. It was a legitimate early signal, but it is one piece of a much larger map, and treating it as the whole story oversimplifies what we now know to be true.
This is one of those cases where the science supports what peer support workers have been saying for years. Hoarding does not come from one cause. It comes from a combination of vulnerability and experience. That means recovery is not about finding the one thing to fix. It is about understanding the whole person.
This week, a case out of Michigan is worth talking about. Not for the shock value, but because it illustrates a specific subtype of hoarding we have not covered yet.
Animal hoarding. And the details here are sobering.
ClickOnDetroit reported on a Redford Township home where more than 20 feral cats were living in conditions so severe that crews could not enter safely for several days without respirators. The basement had more than 2 feet of standing water. The fumes were described as suffocating. The Wayne County Public Health Department declared the property an imminent danger to public health.
This was a multi-agency response involving animal control from several jurisdictions, the fire department, the building department, and Michigan Humane. According to the article, crews were still using live traps, and rescued cats were being transported for evaluation and treatment.
The homeowner was hospitalized and cited for exceeding the allowable number of animals. The article also reported that 2 animal cruelty charges, failure to provide medical care, and maintaining unsanitary conditions, had been submitted to the prosecutor's office.
And I think it is important to say what we always say in situations like this. The person involved is a person. They were hospitalized. This is not cruelty for cruelty's sake. Animal hoarding often comes from the same kind of overwhelmed impulse we see in object hoarding. An inability to say no, a fear of loss, a desperate desire to care for something. And then the situation grows beyond the person's ability to actually provide care.
That is not an excuse. It is context. If all people hear is someone was charged with animal cruelty, they miss the underlying pattern. And treating only the surface, removing the animals without addressing what drove the accumulation, means it can happen again somewhere else with different animals.
The article reported this as an active rescue effort, with live traps being checked as crews worked through unsafe conditions. We will follow up if there are developments worth reporting.
Finally this week, a story that covers very different ground. Charity Today UK published a piece about a man named Leslie Midwinter.
Leslie was made homeless in 2008. He was evicted from his flat after storing large quantities of items of personal importance. He spent 6 months on the streets of Oxfordshire.
Then he was referred to a charity called Response, Oxfordshire's largest independent mental health organization. They specialize in person-centered support for people who struggle with hoarding.
18 years later, Leslie is living in stable, supported accommodation, and he spoke publicly for the first time about what that support looked like.
His words were direct. Letting go of items is still difficult for me, particularly when there is an emotional connection to them. But it got to a point where I needed support. Response has helped me stay in my home and manage things better.
And his support worker, Michael Amoabeng, said something worth repeating. Hoarding is often misunderstood as messiness or a lifestyle choice. In reality, it is a complex mental health condition that can have a serious impact on well-being, relationships, and safety.
What stands out to me about this story is the time frame. 18 years. That is not a quick fix. Leslie still struggles with letting go of items, but he is not homeless. He has a support worker who visits regularly. He understands his triggers. And that is the long game.
A lot of what makes the news about hoarding is the crisis. The eviction, the code enforcement, the animal rescue. Those stories matter. But the work that actually changes outcomes is the quiet, consistent work that happens over years. A support worker who shows up. Trust that builds slowly. A person who learns to manage their relationship with their possessions instead of being controlled by it.
Leslie's story is a reminder that peer support and person-centered care are not soft options. They are what works. It is just that what works does not happen in a 30-second news clip.
The UK estimates up to 4 million people live with hoarding disorder. Stories like Leslie's, where the system got it right, are still the exception, but they prove it is possible.
That's the Stuff Report for this week. We'll see you next time.